Caves of Forgotten Shadows. The summer night was surprisingly warm. 5 tourists are located on the shore of a small lake, surrounded by a dense forest, surrounded by majestic mountains. They came here to enjoy nature, take a break from the hustle and bustle of the city, and just spend time together. The singing of cicadas and the crackling of the campfire calmed down, filling the evening with an atmosphere of comfort and tranquility. When night completely enveloped the forest, Mark, the youngest member of the group, suddenly turned to the others and suggested, "Let's tell scary stories. Who knows anything really creepy?" The others supported his idea, joking and joking, until their gaze settled on Liam, the oldest of them. Liam, smiling silently, looked down and sat for a few seconds as if in thought, then looked up, and his friends caught something disturbing in his gaze. "I have a story," Liam finally said. "His father told it to my father, and his grandfathers knew this story before him. And this is not just a horror story. This is what really happened here, in these places. If you want, I'll tell you. But I warn you, this story is not for the faint of heart." The friends nodded curiously, and Liam began his story, which seemed to touch him to the depths of his soul. "My father told me this story," Liam began. He said that many years ago his father told him a story about mountain caves, which the locals called Caves of Forgotten Shadows. These caves were famous for their mystery and mysterious disappearances. It was said that few people ventured there, and those who returned never remained the same. The 5 friends, of whom George was the most experienced, were not afraid of danger. They were looking for adventures. At that time, they had no idea what this trip would turn out to be for them. One warm day, when the forest beckoned with its serenity, they packed up their belongings, took lanterns, ropes, and other equipment, and set off to conquer the caves. But the further they went deeper into the forest, the more strange their feelings became. The forest, which was always full of sounds and rustles, became quiet. No birds, no wind. They seemed to be walking into the void, as if the world around them held its breath. Liam continued, immersing his friends in a creepy atmosphere. When George and his friends reached the place where the entrance to the caves was located, they were seized with an inexplicable feeling of anxiety. The entrance itself was dark, framed by rough stones on which strange symbols were scratched. Friends did not know their meaning, but there was a kind of primitive savagery in them that aroused dislike. Before entering, one of them, Ben, noticed that something seemed to be moving in the depths of the cave. Flashes of shadow, which he barely caught out of the corner of his eye, made him alert. But George reassured him, saying that it was just a trick of light and dark. The 5 of them went inside, leaving the daylight of the forest behind them, and their lanterns became the only source of light in the depths of the gloomy corridors. They walked on and on, fragments of stones and bones of small animals crunched under their feet, and the walls were cold, as if they had absorbed the fears and secrets of many generations. With each step, the corridors became narrower, and the air became heavier, filled with some kind of suffocating energy. And soon, when they could no longer see the exit, it all started. Liam paused, looked around, and his voice dropped to a whisper. The first strange thing happened when one of them, Thomas, heard someone calling his name. It was a low, barely audible whisper, and at first, Thomas thought he was imagining it. But when he turned around, the others saw his face turn white. He said he heard a woman's voice calling his name, but there was no one in the hallway. George offered to come back, but the others refused. They were determined to reach the end and see all the secrets of the Caves of Forgotten Shadows. But the deeper they went, the more darkness surrounded them. Their lanterns could not penetrate this gloom. It seemed that the darkness itself was alive, moving around them, reaching out to them with invisible tentacles. At some point, their lanterns began to blink, and suddenly one of them, Paul, screamed, pointing at a shadow that slid past him. They froze, listening to the silence, but all they could hear was their own heavy breathing. With each step, the darkness thickened, becoming dense, almost tangible. The tourists around Liam froze, mesmerized by the story. When they were trying to find a way out, one of Johnny's friends seemed to be swallowed up in darkness. He was walking behind, and suddenly the others noticed that he was not there. They came back calling his name, but the only answer they got was their own voice echoing in the void. No one knew what had happened to Johnny, and they felt fear begin to take over their hearts. George kept the team in a fighting spirit, trying to convince them that Johnny was just lost and would soon find his way to them. But deep down, he knew that he had lost a friend. They decided to return, but every turn that they thought would lead them to the exit only deepened them into the bowels of the caves. The darkness around them became more and more ominous, and each of them felt someone's gaze on them, as if someone invisible was watching their every move. Liam paused briefly so that the friends could realize the eeriness of what was happening. The four of them stayed together and kept walking. The shadows around them became more and more dense, and at some point their lanterns went out altogether. Now they were surrounded by total darkness. One of them, Sam, begged to come back, but George said it was too late. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared out of the darkness, moving towards them slowly, like a slow shadow. The creature stopped right in front of them, but its features were unclear. It resembled a human, but its eyes were black voids, all-consuming, like darkness itself. The silence was such that they could hear their own heart beating until the creature began to approach. They scattered, each running in his own direction, and the darkness swallowed them up again. The last thing George remembered was his friends disappearing into the darkness one by one, their screams fading away, leaving him alone in the middle of these ominous corridors. Liam looked at the faces of his friends, seeing fear and anxiety in them. When George managed to get out, he was the only survivor. All wounded and almost unconscious, he came out of the cave. His mind remained on the verge of madness. For a long time, he couldn't say anything coherent. He was in deep shock after what happened there. It was only over time that he was able to describe all the events. He never returned there again and avoided these places for the rest of his life. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw those same shadows and heard whispers calling his name. And he knew that the darkness was waiting for him back, waiting for the moment to take him away completely. When Liam finished, there was a heavy silence around the campfire. The friends silently stared into the fire, feeling fear creep into their hearts. Everyone looked around, and the shadows of the forest seemed more and more ominous. The friends sat in deathly silence, as if the forest itself had held its breath. No one dared to move or disrupt this moment. It seemed to everyone that if they uttered even one word, something ancient and sinister would come to life right in front of their eyes. Everyone was too lost in their own thoughts. Their faces were pale, and their eyes stared into the darkness of the forest, as if enchanted. The feeling that they were not alone became more and more tangible. There was a faint rustle in the distance, and everyone who heard it involuntarily twitched, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The sounds were barely distinguishable, but they sounded like footsteps, like the cautious movements of someone approaching from the darkness. "Did you hear that?" whispered Tom, looking around. He peered into the darkness of the night, but saw only the vague outlines of trees. However, his heart was beating so fast, as if something was right next to him. The others, without saying a word, instinctively moved closer to the fire, and even its warm light no longer seemed so cozy. The shadows from the fire danced around them, twisting as if they were alive, and every crackle of a branch and rustle of leaves made them shudder. "Should we go to sleep?" Rob suggested, but there was doubt in his voice. He was afraid to be alone in the tent, where darkness envelops from all sides, like in caves of forgotten shadows. And it was obvious to him that the others felt the same way. But no one got up or moved. All 5 of them continued to sit by the fire, trying their best not to look into the darkness, but involuntarily catching every rustle, every strange sound. The night seemed endless, and with every minute the fear spread more and more, as if something was really waiting outside to take over them.